Okay, well, thank you and good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Again, thank you for attending our Bloomberg Intelligence call on the Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan aid package that is currently going through the House of Representatives this week. We've had an extremely busy week, and Matt Schettenhelm and I would like to talk to you about the package and also about the inclusion of a TikTok ban. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Nathan Dean. I'm a senior policy analyst here in the Washington, D.C. office, and sitting 4 desks over to my left is Matt Schettenhelm, our litigation and policy analyst for technology, media, and telecom. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about this Ukraine package. Now, why are we here? Why is this happening this week? So back in February, the Senate passed a $95.3 billion deal providing aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. This passed through the Senate with bipartisan support. Senate leadership from both parties were on board. This is Senator Chuck Schumer from New York, Senator Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, and both of them passed the bill and said, look, it's time for the House to act. And the House, as I think everybody who's watching this call knows, the House did not act as quickly. The reason being is that there is still a significant number of Republicans on the House side that have an isolationist view, and combined with the fact that Speaker Mike Johnson, who is the House Speaker of the House, has a one-person majority when it comes to a motion to vacate, aka to kick out him from that position. The combination of all that together made putting Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan aid onto the House floor an extremely challenging endeavor. So, over the past few weeks, Speaker Johnson has been trying to figure out a way to get Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan aid onto the floor at the same time of keeping his job. Now, I'll talk about his job prospects at the end of the call, but a lot of what he's been doing is working with his allies and also reaching out to former President Donald Trump to figure out if there's a way that he can do it without having this motion to vacate come in and replace him. Just last week, he did a press conference with the former president down in Mar-a-Lago, where President Trump expressed openness to the idea of providing zero interest loans, if you will, to Ukraine, and certainly gave him a political cover or a shield, if you will, to go forth and move forward with the package that you see today. Now, what has the House proposed? Well, on Tuesday this week, the House released 4 bills, which will, after they pass, be combined into one package to send to the Senate. There's a 5th bill out there that has to do with government security. I'm not going to talk about that bill in this call because it's most likely never going to see the light of day. It's more of a Republican wish list bill that was put out there to placate those who say that not enough is being done on security. But I am going to talk about the 4 other bills. Now, at a high level, remember the Senate came out with $95.3 billion. The House came out with $95.3 billion. It's the same top line number. There are some slight differences, though, and I'd like to just highlight what this means for Ukraine first. So when it comes to Ukraine, there's about $60.84 billion in total for Ukraine. 23.2 of that billion is to replenish defense articles and defense services provided to Ukraine. And 13.8 billion of that is for the procurement of advanced weapon systems, defense articles, and defense services. Take that all together, and that's a decent amount of coin that is being spent to replenish weapons and to be replenished systems that are being used in the conflict with Russia. It's not an equipment purchase, it's more of a munitions purchase. And so just this week, my colleague Will Lee and I, if you're interested in the contracting space, I highly recommend you reach out to Will. Will and I put out a note essentially saying that the big winners of the Ukraine package is RTX and General Dynamics because of this weapons focused, if you will. The majority of this funds, if you will, remember, are coming back to the U.S. industrial base. So even though this is money being sent from the U.S. to Ukraine, the majority of it is then being sent back to the United States in terms of the U.S. industrial base, and RTX and General Dynamics are the most benefit there. Now, when it comes to Israel, Israel gets 26.38 billion. This is a little bit more than the Senate package that came out. 4 billion to replenish the Iron Dome and the David Sling missile defense system. 1.2 billion for the Iron Beam defense system. Now, these are Israeli operated systems. Now, the impact to contractors isn't as great here. Lower dollar amounts, plus a lot of this is not coming back to the U.S. industrial base. But we always use this opportunity to note that the Israeli-Iranian conflict that's going on right now tends to favor Boeing and Lockheed Martin. The reason being is that Israel has been on the has been pursuing a purchase of 50 F-15 fighters, which are created by Boeing. And there's also a discussion about potentially F-35 fighters that are procured by Lockheed Martin. And so there's a significant amount of impact here. And I should have said earlier in the Ukraine discussion that all that money that's coming back to RTX and General Dynamics equates to about 1 to 2% revenue growth over the next few years. If you're trying to model this from a perspective, just keep in mind that when the money is actually released from the president's desk, even though it's going to go to Ukraine fairly quickly, there is going to be a lag in terms of actually how the funds get sent out there and so forth like that. And so you may see a 6 to 9 month, 12-month delay in terms of actually seeing this come through in the contractor revenue and income statement and so forth like that. Now, just real quickly on the Taiwan aid, 8.12 billion in terms of Taiwan, 3.3 billion of that goes to submarine infrastructure, 2 billion goes to working with our allies in the region, and only 1.9 billion in terms of defense articles and weapons procurement provided to Taiwan. So you can see the dollar amounts are much less. Now, the fourth bill that I was talking about is more of a hodgepodge bill. And there are certain things included in this bill, including the TikTok ban, which is what I'm going to turn over to Matt for a second, because look, anybody who's got a teenager knows, is TikTok going to be banned this year? Because the teenagers have been pretty much up in the arms over this. But in the TikTok bill is also language called the Repo Act. Now, this is helping to pay for some of that $95.3 billion. And what the Repo Act does is that it allows the United States to repossess money that has been frozen from Russian oligarchs and use it in defense of Ukraine. Now, there's about $300 billion across the globe that has been frozen. The problem is only 8 to 10 billion of that is here in the United States. The rest of it is in Europe, or mostly in Europe. And Europe, for a variety of their own reasons, geopolitical, macro, and so forth like that, just isn't as anxious to reclaw back the money and use it in response to Ukraine. So after this bill passes, the United States will most likely be able to get 8 to 10 billion dollars. But for the rest of that money, that's something that the Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen, is going to have to talk about with her European counterparts over the next few months to see if there's any progress can be made there. But like I said before, also included in this is a TikTok ban. So I'd like to turn it over to Matt just briefly to tell us about his thoughts on what he's thinking there.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. So just an overview of what this bill does and why it matters from an investment perspective. So the basic operation of this bill is that it says that any app that is owned by ByteDance or by TikTok can't be hosted on any internet hosting service in a way that makes it available in the United States. It can't be carried in app stores. And there's an enforcement mechanism for anyone that would do that hosting or that would carry it in an app store with the threat of significant financial penalties if you do that. And so TikTok steals a lot of attention and eyeballs and advertising dollars from Meta and Snap. And so if this were to play out and TikTok were removed as an app that could be hosted in the United States, obviously that's a big gain to the advertising business of Snap and Meta. And so the question is, will this actually play out? We saw, this all kind of grew quickly in March when the House passed its version of this bill by an overwhelming majority. About 84% of members voted in support of this bill. And then it went over to the Senate, and it looked like the Senate was going to really take its time on this. In my view, I think there is some danger in enacting a TikTok ban and President Biden signing it in an election year, especially with President Trump on the other side of this issue. And so I think the Senate's plan was to sort of, okay, let's take this seriously. Let's support it in principle, but let's work on it and maybe push it out past the election. Well, what Nathan's talked about with this package this week sort of boxes in the Democrats in the Senate, because by bundling it with all this other legislation that needs to pass, it effectively forces the Senate's hand, and it can't do that slow down game anymore. This needs to move, and it needs to move fast. And so I think I think it's very, I went, being skeptical that it would happen this year to thinking it's more likely than not with this. And we saw key Senator Maria Cantwell, who leads the Commerce Committee, contributing her thoughts to revise the House bill, and it's been adjusted now. So one thing I didn't mention that, so you can avoid this ban by divesting the app, and the bill gives 270 days after passage. So TikTok's not going to escape, not going to fall off your phones before the election. But it's going to happen, next year sometime, and then it throws in an extra 90 days if the president sees that this is happening. And there's some progress going towards that process. And so basically 360 days from passage, which could happen in the second quarter. So that's the so more likely than not to pass. I think this was a very, very astute maneuver to package it in this larger package, more likely than not to get through. But then you have two questions. Will there be a divestiture? And China has, at least in a posturing mode, signaled it won't approve any sort of divestiture. But so leave that to one side. But then you're also going to see a serious court challenge brought by TikTok and by its users, and that will go to the D.C. Circuit here in D.C., the Federal Appeals Court, and basically going to make the case that the government could have done something that was less disruptive to speech. And so pushing for the whole thing to be struck down is unconstitutional. So those are going to be the two items that are going to play out over the next year. But you're assuming those hurdles can't be cleared, and you're looking at a ban in the middle of next year sometime if all that plays out. So let me, with that, toss it back to you, Nathan.
Great. Thank you. So next thing we're going to talk about is what's going to happen in terms of passage. Well, look, I think this is going to pass. Come Saturday night, there's going to be 4 separate votes, 5 if you include the government border bill. Additionally, there'll be more votes in terms of voting to get to the vote and so forth. So if you're like me and you want to, watch C-SPAN on Saturday night, feel free to join me. But there's going to be a tremendous amount of votes on Saturday night. Ultimately, though, this is going to pass. And ultimately, there are going to be more Democrats supporting this than Republicans, which is not a good look for Speaker Johnson. Anecdotally, we even heard that some Republican members were leaving town yesterday over at Reagan Airport because they just don't want any part of this. Now, will there be a motion to vacate? Actually, before I get to the motion to vacate, when will the Senate take this up? It can either, I think they're supposed to be out next week, but they are remaining around town for the FISA bill. So you could see the Senate come back and try and get this to the president's desk sooner rather than later. So I think the Senate will sign it. I think they will they'll take one vote because all 4 will be packaged into one, and then it'll go to the president's desk shortly thereafter. Now, next question, will Speaker Mike Johnson survive his motion to vacate? Now, for those of you who aren't aware, there is a motion to vacate rule that the Republicans have put in place that allows one member to go to the floor and ask for a motion to vacate. And then you have a majority rules vote. And if all the Democrats vote yes, like they did when former Speaker Kevin McCarthy faced his motion to vacate, then the Speaker loses his or her position. Now, in this case, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has already filed the motion, but she hasn't acted upon it. This has happened in the past. However, all it takes is for her to go to the floor and say, right, I'm ready to have a vote. And in fact, Representative Massey from Kentucky also went ahead and said that he supports this motion to vacate and called upon Speaker Johnson to resign. Now, why did Speaker Johnson move forward with the Ukraine bill? Actually, I think a lot of it can be indicative of a comment that he made earlier this week where he was talking about his own personal experiences and the fact that his son is about to go into the U.S. Naval Academy. And he said something to the point, and I'm paraphrasing here, that if we don't stop Russia and conflicts, and if we don't end these conflicts now, today we could be sending American dollars, tomorrow we could be sending American troops. And so I think the national security briefings that were given to him somewhat actually, scored some points. And I think ultimately he decided that he wanted to move forward with this. But he will pay a political price because I do think the motion to vacate is going to come in the next few weeks. Now, what will happen here is the motion to vacate will come, and the Democrats most likely will save him. We've seen statements from moderate Democrats in New York saying that they're willing to help the speaker out, and they would be willing to help the speaker out without much in return. Just the idea of getting Ukraine and Israeli aid across the line is enough to bring some of this Democratic support. Now, that means Speaker Johnson's going to be able to keep his job, but it can't be a good feeling to be a Republican Speaker of the House being protected by Democrats. But what I will say, and I've said this before, is that ultimately it's a difficult job. We're 6 months away from the election, and I'm not sure that there are many people out on Capitol Hill at the moment that would want that job. And so I think Speaker Johnson becomes more of a caretaker speaker for the rest of the year. There are certainly things they have to get across the line. FAA reauthorization in early May, the funding bill, the farm bill, if you will, that's all coming up due in September. So there are still things the speaker has to do, but once the Ukraine-Israeli aid idea gets off their plate, there's a lot less important things. I shouldn't say that. To the farmers that are listening to this call, the farm bill is extremely important. But there are things that are just not to the same importance as the Ukraine-Israeli aid and so forth like that. So Speaker Johnson becomes a caretaker caretaker speaker, and then it just really depends on the election. If the Democrats take the House, Speaker Johnson's not going to be Speaker. If the Republicans take the House, it really depends on what the margin is, because a lot of this is happening solely because of this 1, 2, 3, 4-person margin and so forth. Now, the last question I got is, this is actually a question I got on Bloomberg TV earlier this week, and I thought it was important enough that I would say it here. The anchor asked me, okay, well, we're seeing a lot of scary headlines to all of these conflicts, but yet at the same time, you're saying that Congress is going to get something done. How do you actually take the two together? Well, my response to that is Congress has the ability to hand out the cash. With this package, they're handing out the cash. But when it comes to working with our allies in the region, that is up to the Secretary of the State, the Secretary of the Defense, and that is up to the President. In terms of U.S. political power, the President has a lot of power when it comes to foreign security and national security. So with this, Congress will have done their job. They will have handed out the cash. But then for the rest of the year, when it comes to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan and so forth, it's really up to the President. So at least you don't have to have the concern of congressional inaction impacting macro and geopolitical matters. So with that, I want to send you back to your weekend. Thank you very much. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions or anything that we can help with. And if you had jumped on the call late and wish to watch the early parts of this, send me a note. It's going to be on YouTube probably within the next 10 to 15 minutes and available for everybody. Thank you very much, and thanks again.